On the 12th of May 2023, a research paper published in the journal Quaternary Science Reviews brought something remarkable into the world of paleoanthropology. A team of international scientists led by Dr. Flavio Altamura of the Senckenberg Center for Human Evolution and Paleoenvironment at the University of Tübingen had discovered footprints, but not just any footprints, 3. Sets of tracks had been pressed into the ancient lakeshore mud of Schöningen in Lower Saxony, Germany. Preserved for approximately 300,000 years, they had remained hidden while empires rose and collapsed, entire species disappeared, and the human brain eventually developed the science capable of recognizing what those ancient marks actually represented. When you strip away the careful academic language and look at what the evidence is genuinely telling us, the discovery becomes fascinating. These footprints do not allow scientists to identify their makers with absolute certainty. Nobody who created them has a confirmed face, a confirmed name, or a complete skeleton that can be directly connected to the tracks. The creatures that pressed their feet into that ancient German mud may represent a chapter of human prehistory that we have not yet fully reconstructed. To understand why this matters, you first have to understand Schöningen itself. This is not an ordinary archaeological site. It is one of the most extraordinary windows into Middle Pleistocene life anywhere in the world. Located in Lower Saxony in northwestern Germany, the Schöningen complex has been revealing secrets for decades, and almost every major discovery has made the story of early humans more complicated. The site was originally a coal mine. Excavations beginning in the 1990s uncovered remarkably preserved wooden objects, and what emerged from the ground stunned the scientific community. Researchers discovered wooden spears, not simply fragments or splinters, but complete, carefully shaped hunting weapons. These became some of the oldest known wooden hunting weapons ever discovered. At least 10 spears were found alongside throwing sticks and the butchered remains of more than 50 horses, all preserved within waterlogged sediments surrounding what had once been an ancient lakeshore. The craftsmanship of these weapons revealed something extremely important about the people who made them. They were not simply surviving through instinct. They selected particular types of wood, removed the bark, shaped the material, and created carefully balanced weapons. The spears possessed aerodynamic profiles and practical grips. Their design demonstrated planning, technical knowledge, and an understanding of how materials could be transformed into effective hunting tools. But the story becomes even more interesting when we look at the dating. A later study published in 2025 used amino acid geochronology to reassess the age of the spear-bearing deposits. The results placed the weapons at approximately 200,000 years old, rather than the roughly 300,000 years previously associated with them. This distinction is important because it means the Schöningen site preserves evidence from different periods of human activity. The footprints belong to an older geological layer, while the famous spears belong to a later period. In other words, the same ancient lakeshore was repeatedly used across enormous stretches of time. Different groups returned to the same environment, drawn by water, food, shelter, and the animals that lived around the lake. This is where the footprints become particularly intriguing. The research describing them was extremely careful. Scientists used three-dimensional scanning, photogrammetry, sediment analysis, and dating techniques to establish that the tracks were genuine. Footprints made by bipedal creatures, and that they were approximately 300,000 years old. The footprints range from roughly 18 to 26 centimeters in length. Their different sizes suggest that several individuals were responsible for them, including smaller individuals and a larger adult. Researchers interpreted the arrangement and surrounding evidence as potentially representing a family group rather than a hunting party. The presence of smaller tracks is particularly interesting because it suggests that children may have been present at the lakeshore. The surrounding environment also provides important clues. The ancient landscape contained plants, fruits, mushrooms, and other resources that could be gathered rather than hunted. This creates a picture of a group of human-like beings moving through a lakeside environment, possibly searching for food while staying close to one another. But there is an important limitation, and it is one that often gets lost when discoveries like this are presented to the public. Footprints can tell us a great deal about how an individual moved, how large they were, and whether they walked on two legs. But footprints alone cannot always tell us exactly which species made them. Without bones, teeth, or other biological remains that can be directly connected to the tracks, the species identity of the individuals who left them cannot be confirmed with absolute certainty. Researchers have suggested that the tracks were most likely made by Homo heidelbergensis, but most likely is not the same as proven. That distinction opens a much larger question. If the footprints were made by Homo heidelbergensis, they fit relatively comfortably into what scientists already know about human evolution in Europe. But what if they belong to another population? Who else could have been walking through Europe approximately 300,000 years ago? The honest answer is that scientists still do not have a complete picture. The Middle Pleistocene, which spans approximately 780,000 to 129,000 years ago, is sometimes described by researchers as the muddle in the middle. The phrase reflects how complicated this period is for human evolutionary research. Scientists know that Homo heidelbergensis existed. They know that Neanderthals were emerging from earlier populations in Europe. They also know that the ancestors of Denisovans existed somewhere across Eurasia. Yet the fossil record from this period is incomplete and fragmented. Scientists still debate which fossils belong to which populations, whether some named species should actually be considered separate species, and how many different human-like groups were living at the same time. The Schöningen footprints sit directly inside this complicated period. They were created by bipedal, human-like, individuals at a time when several human-related populations were living across Europe and Asia. The most conservative interpretation is that they were made by Homo heidelbergensis, but the scientific evidence does not allow researchers to completely eliminate other possibilities. Homo heidelbergensis itself is one of the more complicated figures in the human family tree. The species was identified from a jawbone discovered near Mauer, Germany in 1907 and formally described the following year. For more than a century, scientists have debated where this population lived, how long it survived, and how exactly it was related to later human groups. What is generally accepted is that populations assigned to Homo heidelbergensis, or closely related Middle Pleistocene groups, lived across parts of Europe and Africa and possessed relatively large brains, robust bodies, and increasingly sophisticated technological abilities. The Schöningen evidence is particularly important because it demonstrates advanced woodworking and organized hunting behavior. The weapons indicate that these ancient humans were capable of planning, cooperation, and technical craftsmanship. Scientists have also proposed that Middle Pleistocene populations related to Homo heidelbergensis played an important role in the ancestry of later human groups. In Europe, populations eventually became associated with Neanderthals. In Africa, other populations contributed to the evolutionary history leading toward modern humans. And somewhere in Asia, another mysterious branch eventually became known as the Denisovans. The Denisovans changed the story of human evolution dramatically. Scientists did not initially discover the Denisovans through a complete skeleton. Instead, their existence was revealed through ancient DNA extracted from a tiny fingerbone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia. The genetic material was sufficiently different from both Neanderthals and modern humans that researchers realized they were dealing with a previously unknown human lineage. This discovery demonstrated something profound. A human population could exist for hundreds of thousands of years and leave behind only an extremely limited fossil record, while still leaving a recognizable genetic signature in modern people. In other words, scientists could discover the genome of an ancient human relative before discovering what that population actually looked like. Ancient DNA has completely changed the way researchers think about human prehistory. Human evolution was not a simple, straight line in which one species appeared, replaced another, and disappeared forever. Instead, it was more like a complicated network of populations that separated, migrated, encountered one another, and sometimes interbred. Modern genetic evidence demonstrates that many people outside Africa carry Neanderthal ancestry, generally around 1 to 2%, with some populations showing somewhat different proportions. This ancestry reflects ancient interactions between modern human ancestors and Neanderthal populations after humans expanded beyond Africa. Denisovan ancestry provides another example. Some populations in Oceania and parts of Asia carry substantial Denisovan-derived genetic material, showing that Denisovan populations interacted and interbred with the ancestors of modern humans. But the story becomes even more mysterious when scientists look for genetic signals that cannot easily be explained by either Neanderthals or Denisovans. Genomic studies have identified evidence for what researchers sometimes describe as ghost populations. These are ancient human-related populations that are not represented by a clearly identified genome or fossil population, but whose genetic contribution can be detected indirectly in the DNA of later populations. This is an extraordinary concept. It means that an ancient population can disappear physically and leave almost no recognizable fossils behind, while fragments of its genetic legacy survive inside people living thousands of generations later. Scientists have proposed several such deep ancestral contributions in different populations, although the exact interpretation and timing remain subjects of ongoing research. These signals demonstrate just how incomplete the fossil record can be. And this brings us back to those 3 footprints in Germany. Imagine the landscape 300,000 years ago. There is no modern Germany, no modern Europe, and no cities or roads. Instead, there's an ancient lake surrounded by vegetation. Large animals move through the landscape. Horses gather near the water. Rhinoceroses and other large mammals pass through the region. Human-like groups move across the shoreline, searching for food and resources. At some point, a small group walks across the wet sediment. One individual is larger, others are smaller. Some may have been children. Their feet sink into the soft mud, leaving impressions behind. Then they move on. The lake continues to exist. Sediment gradually covers the tracks. Seasons pass. Thousands of years become tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Eventually, the lake disappears. The animals disappear. The people who walked there disappear. But the footprints remain. That is what makes footprints so powerful. A skeleton tells us what an individual was physically like. A stone tool tells us that someone was capable of making and using technology. But a footprint can capture a moment of movement. It is evidence that a living individual was physically present in a specific place, at a specific moment in time. The footprints at Schöningen therefore provide a rare snapshot of human-like activity during one of the most poorly understood periods of our evolutionary history. And modern technology may eventually allow researchers to extract even more information from them. For decades, footprint analysis depended heavily on expert interpretation. Researchers examined the shape, depth, pressure distribution, length, width, and spacing of individual tracks. They compared these characteristics with known human and hominin footprints. Today, three-dimensional imaging and computational analysis are making this process increasingly precise. High-resolution scans can preserve the geometry of footprints in extraordinary detail. Researchers can analyze the exact contours of the surface and compare them with other archaeological footprints. Artificial intelligence and machine learning methods may eventually become useful in this area as databases of fossil footprints grow. Instead of relying entirely on visual comparison, computational systems can analyze large numbers of measurements and identify patterns that might be difficult for humans to recognize. This does not mean an AI system can simply look at a footprint and magically reveal the species that made it. The available training data is limited, and archaeological evidence must always be interpreted within its geological and biological context. But computational analysis can help researchers determine whether a footprint falls comfortably within the known range of a particular group, or whether it displays unusual characteristics. That distinction could become important for discoveries like Schöningen. If future analysis confirms that the footprints closely resemble those expected from Homo heidelbergensis, the mystery becomes somewhat clearer. But if the tracks consistently show characteristics outside the known range, researchers may have to consider whether they represent variation within an existing population or evidence of something less familiar. The key point is that the footprints do not currently prove the existence of an unknown human species. They do, however, remind us how incomplete our knowledge of the Middle Pleistocene remains. The Schöningen site becomes even more fascinating when the footprints are considered alongside the later spear discoveries. The footprints are approximately 300,000 years old, while the famous wooden weapons belong to a later period of around 200,000 years ago, based on more recent dating. That means the same landscape preserves different chapters of human behavior. In the older layer, footprints capture individuals moving beside an ancient lake. In the later layer, the site preserves evidence of organized hunting, woodworking, and the deliberate processing of large animals. More than 50 horses were butchered at Schöningen, and the evidence suggests repeated hunting activity. The wooden weapons and stone tools indicate that these people possessed considerable technical and social abilities. This is important because older stereotypes often portrayed ancient humans as primitive, isolated, and incapable of complex planning. Archaeological discoveries have repeatedly challenged that picture. The people responsible for the Schöningen weapons understood materials, designed effective hunting equipment, and apparently coordinated their actions in groups. The footprints tell a different but equally human story. They show movement. They suggest a group. They may include children. They place human-like individuals in a natural landscape rather than simply beside a pile of tools. Together, these discoveries help reconstruct not just technology, but behavior. And that is where the broader mystery of human evolution becomes impossible to ignore. The story of our origins is not a straight road. It is a tangled network. Populations separated from one another, evolved in different environments, migrated across continents, and sometimes came back into contact. Some groups survived for hundreds of thousands of years. Others disappeared. Some left spectacular fossils. Others left almost nothing. Some left their legacy in stone. Others left it in wood. And some may have left only their DNA. The existence of ghost populations demonstrates just how much can disappear from the fossil record. If researchers can identify genetic traces from an ancient population without possessing a clearly identified skeleton, then it is entirely possible that many other populations existed without leaving enough evidence for us to recognize them today. This does not mean every unexplained footprint belongs to a mysterious lost species. Science requires evidence, and the evidence from Schöningen is not sufficient to make such a claim. The more scientifically meaningful conclusion is more subtle. The footprints show that human-like individuals were present in this environment approximately 300,000 years ago. Their exact species identity cannot be established from the footprints alone. The surrounding fossil and archaeological record makes Homo heidelbergensis a reasonable candidate, but the evidence does not completely eliminate other possibilities. That uncertainty is not a weakness. It is exactly how science is supposed to work. When the evidence is incomplete, scientists should not invent certainty where none exists. They should describe what the evidence supports, identify what remains uncertain, and continue looking for new evidence. And the search continues. Every excavation has the potential to change the picture. A single tooth can reveal the presence of a previously unknown population. A fragment of bone can provide DNA. A new footprint can expand the known range of an ancient group. A new dating technique can change the age of an archaeological layer. Ancient DNA can be even more transformative. The Denisovan discovery demonstrated that an entire human lineage could remain almost invisible in the fossil record until genetic technology revealed its existence. Future discoveries may reveal additional populations that are currently known only through indirect genetic evidence. Perhaps somewhere in a cave, beneath an ancient lake sediment, or inside a museum collection, sits a fossil that has not yet been recognized for what it is. Perhaps there are footprints waiting beneath layers of sediment. Perhaps there are genomes waiting inside bones that have not yet been analyzed. Or perhaps some populations are gone forever, leaving behind nothing more than a few. Traces that scientists will never be able to connect into a complete story. That possibility is both frustrating and fascinating, because when we look at those 3 footprints from Schöningen, we are not simply looking at impressions in ancient mud. We are looking at evidence that someone was there. Someone walked along that ancient lakeshore. Someone moved through a world that no longer exists. Perhaps they walked with their children. Perhaps they were searching for food. Perhaps they were simply moving from one part of the shoreline to another. We will probably never know exactly what they were thinking. We may never know their names. We may never see their faces. But for one brief moment, approximately 300,000 years ago, their feet pressed into the mud, and somehow, against almost impossible odds, those marks survived. The lake disappeared. The landscape changed. The animals vanished. The individuals who created the tracks disappeared into the deep history of our species. Yet the footprints remained. 3 small pieces of evidence survived hundreds of thousands of years to reach us. And perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is not that scientists have discovered an unknown human ancestor. They have not proven that. The remarkable part is that the evidence reminds us how much of the human story remains unknown. The Middle Pleistocene was a world filled with populations that were moving, separating, meeting, and sometimes mixing. The boundaries between groups were far more complicated than a simple family tree suggests. Some populations became ancestors of later humans. Others disappeared. Some left recognizable fossils. Others survived only through fragments of DNA. The Schöningen footprints sit directly inside that mystery. They are physical evidence of a human-like presence in a period where the fossil record is incomplete and debated. They connect archaeology with genetics, geology, technology, and the rapidly expanding ability of modern science to analyze ancient evidence. And perhaps, one day, a new discovery will finally tell us exactly who made them. Until then, the footprints remain a question written into the ancient earth. 3 impressions in mud, 3 reminders that our evolutionary past was not simple, and 3 silent messages from a world that vanished hundreds of thousands of years ago, telling us that the human story is far older, stranger, and more complicated than we once imagined. The footprints do not give us every answer, but they give us something almost as valuable. They give us evidence that there are still chapters of human history waiting to be discovered. And somewhere beneath the ground, inside ancient bones, preserved sediments, forgotten caves, and even within the DNA of people alive today, those missing chapters may still be waiting for us.